Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Leisrealtalk. I'm Lei. Happy Tuesday. Happy Wednesday. Good morning. Good evening. Welcome. All right. So we'll talk about Xi Jinping and his best friend, Vladimir Putin, right? They're in the news today. Actually, they've been in the news since this weekend. Let's talk about what makes Xi Jinping so fond of Vladimir Putin. So less than 2 weeks after becoming the president of China for the third time, Xi Jinping went to visit Moscow. And it's his first foreign visit of the year. And he is the first head of state of a major country visiting Moscow after Russia invaded Ukraine. But Xi's renewed camaraderie with Putin may come with a price: the prospect of economic sanctions from the United States and losing Europe in China's effort to cleave Europe from the United States, being more isolated on the international stage, the unpredictable future of Russia and Putin, who's now wanted by the International Criminal Court for his war crime. So obviously, Xi Jinping has decided to take a gamble. What does he want from Putin, or where does his affinity with Russia and Putin come from? And that's what we'll discuss today. The answer is, of course, related to the United States. But we'll answer this question from three angles. First, we'll talk about the tactical reasons. Then we'll talk about the strategic reasons. And then last, we'll talk about the personal reasons. The tactical reasons probably would take the bulk of today's presentation. So there have been many reports about the tactical reasons. I read media reports today, and they have pretty much, they have collectively summarized the reasons being the two major reasons. The first is keeping the Russian economy afloat will prolong the war and prevent the Putin regime from falling. And Beijing knows that the longer the war goes on, the more resources the United States and the EU would devote to Ukraine. And this will bring about economic problems and anti-war sentiment in the West. This will ultimately weaken the United States and give China a better chance or more time to prepare for its unification with Taiwan. So that's pretty much the tactical reason number one. And then the tactical reason number two is it's a good chance for Xi Jinping to show that he is a world-shaping leader in global affairs, and that China is an effective, counterweight to the United States. Now, I just want to quickly give you a kind of a summary of what pretty much the Western medias have covered those two major points. There may be other variations, but that's kind of the highlight of everything. But the CCP also gave the reasons why Xi Jinping wants to go to Russia. And before Xi Jinping's visit, the state-controlled media launched a heavy publicity campaign domestically. And People's Daily had an article titled, you know how Xi Jinping and Putin each published their article in the other person's state media, like Putin published his article in China, and then Xi Jinping published his article in Russia. And also I noticed that media have already reported on that. I'm not going to focus on that. But what I want to tell you about is People's Daily had an article titled, "Why Does the Chinese Leader Want to Go to Russia?" on the 18th. Although the article is a typical CCP propaganda and is written in a combative CCP language, and it's very emotionally charged, shall we say, it does reveal the true thinking of the Chinese leader. I have said that Xi Jinping is a micromanager. I call him the world's first micromanaging dictator. And because he likes to control everything himself. But this article that explains why he wants to visit Russia wasn't just randomly written by a staff of his. When you read it, you can tell his views are clearly presented between the lines. I have a picture just to show you. So for those, this is the article. For those of you who read Chinese, you can take a screenshot of this and have Googled it afterwards. It's all over the internet. And I'm just going to and it's interesting how they highlighted the texts that are important to the publisher or to the author, so you could pretty much see like what's more important to them. And I translated some of the parts that I think that are most interesting. I'll read them to you. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, about like 8 points. Actually, 9 points. Yeah, this is basically a translation from this article. So the first said, Chinese leaders' visit of Russia is normal interaction between two sovereign states, which isn't affected by complex geopolitics, nor subject to the opinion of a certain country. So we know a certain country here is the United States. And then this is not everything. I'm just kind of going down the list of points that I think are interesting. What I'm going to read you is probably less than 10% of what's in the article, so you can't take what I'm going to tell you as like everything that's in the article. It's only the points that I think worth sharing. And then it went on to say there are issues and differences between Russia and China, but the two sides always try to find solutions through friendly consultations. So the article did acknowledge the differences and conflicts between the two countries. Okay. And then it says in recent times, American media has been leaking updates about the visit every few days. Senior U.S. officials have continued saying, quote, China is considering providing lethal weapons to Russia and intimidated China with real consequences if China does so. Okay, so that's what it says. And then it goes on to say, the more the U.S. is engaged in this, quote, beating the drums while walking at night approach, the more it reveals its own weakness. So let me repeat that. The more the U.S. is engaged in this beating the drums while walking at night approach, the more it reveals its own weakness. Beating the drums while walking at night is a metaphor that means when someone is scared, when you're scared walking at night, you beat the drums to kind of make you not afraid because you're making a loud noise, and that kind of, you know, the drums in ancient China is a weapon. Like on battlefield, there's soldiers beating drums just to encourage. It's a form of encouragement to make soldiers be brave. So it's just saying that the U.S. is beating the drums while walking at night, but it only reveals its weakness. And it goes on to say, it's also important to see that the American move, which is what we just described, is a typical cognitive warfare tactic. They first release intelligence information intensively to, quote, predict the policy or actions that China may take. And then through verification, elaboration, or discussions by, in this case, American officials, academics, and media, to promote their narrative, they restrict China's diplomatic space and limit its choices, and it costs them nothing. So I thought that's interesting. So basically, what the Chinese is saying that, you know how the American media has been saying that, you know, according to intelligence, you know, we know that the Chinese is considering or is in the process of providing lethal weapons to the Russians, and Xi Jinping is going to visit Russia. Like all of this is leaked through intelligence, right? I mean, it's leaked on purpose, according to the Chinese, and the Chinese see this as a cognitive warfare tactic. But they do acknowledge that it costs the Americans nothing. It's a very effective way to limit China's choices. And then it says the US wants to crush both China and Russia, but has achieved the opposite results by helping China and Russia become closer and closer. And then it says from NATO to the G7, the Five Eyes to the Quad to the AUKUS, the United States has been building small circles, creating an anti-China and anti-Russia systems, trying to drag the world into the abyss of division and confrontation. In 2021, the Biden administration urged or pushed for its first democracy summit in an attempt to gang up on China and Russia in the name of democracy. But the event turned out to be disastrous with few participants. And then it says the US is trying to give a life-saving shot to revive its terminally ill American democracy, and the end is predictable. And last point that I want to point out is the key to solving the crisis in Ukraine is not in the hands of China, but in the hands of the United States and the West. Okay, what I read you is only about 5% of the text, but if you remove the emotions and the CCP jargons, you can somehow see how Xi Jinping reacts to the United States. You can see his thinking. It's very clear that Xi Jinping went to Russia because of the United States. No matter how you read it, the article basically says that China needs to bond with Russia in its confrontation with the United States. And that's very clear. But here I want to point out several things from what I just read you, because I said these texts, if you remove the emotions and these CCP style of writing, you can sense Xi Jinping's thinking, right? I think these writings are not, like I said, are not just written by some staff members. You can read between the lines his thoughts in them, if you know how to read them. So first of all, what I got out of this is, despite the Chinese calling Xi Jinping's trip a peacemaking trip, Xi Jinping doesn't believe China plays a crucial role in ending the crisis in Ukraine, because the article said at the end, the key to solving the crisis in Ukraine is not in the hands of China, it's in the hands of the United States and the West. I think Xi Jinping knows full well that he's incapable of ending the war. He only uses the occasion to build up his image as a world-shaping leader. And the CCP has correctly said that the ending of the war is in the hands of the West, or the West-supported Ukraine. And secondly, Beijing feels threatened by the various strategic alliances the US has established in the past 3 years. And the CCP named them all: the Quad, AUKUS, the Democracy Summit. And now with its neighbors, Japan and South Korea, forming a new alliances, or improving their relations, and also join forces with the United States, the CCP is more scared. In an article, it called the United States paper tiger and said that the Chinese are not scared. But you know that the very reason China wants to bond with Russia is the fact that is the encircling the United States has done in the past 3 years. Third, Xi Jinping reacted to the US government's leaked intelligence about, first, Russia's intent on war in early 2022, and now China's intent on supplying lethal weapons to Russia. Remember back in January or February of last year, before the war, Biden had said that Russia was preparing for war. And the same thing is happening now, right? The US government is saying Xi Jinping is visiting Russia, and then China is preparing lethal weapons. And Beijing reacted. And they call it a cognitive warfare tactic. I think, of course, CCP will react. That's for sure, right? It reacts to everything. But just by reading how the CCP reacted, I think the US government probably should review this tactic. As in the case of Russia, it didn't stop the war from taking place. And I think this tactic may not stop the CCP from supplying weapons to the Russians, because this tactic works only when your opponent has a good sense of judgment. If you're dealing with a gambler who doesn't care about consequences, this type of warning may not work very well. And that just struck me when I was reading CCP's long, crazy article. One analogy would be like if you have a kid who's throwing a temper tantrum and wants to do something destructive, you warn him and said, I know what you're going to do, and if you do this, here are the consequences, right? You tell the kid ahead of time what he's about to do. A normal kid would stop because they fear you, or he fears you because you're the parent, you're the adult. But if you're dealing with a kid who already sees you as an enemy, they might just do it to annoy you. So that's just a rough idea, just to give you an analogy. So I don't know if the tactic that U.S. government uses by making it public, would that really stop a gambler or an opponent who already sees you as an enemy to stop? I do not think that's a very good tactic. They may just, once you say it, then they feel like they have to do it, because you're not dealing with somebody who's rational. And also because of that, and the CCP recognized that. CCP recognized that your tactic cannot stop me. So CCP is calling the US weak. Don't underestimate what the CCP said here. I know, sometimes we have problem, when we read those crazy CCP propaganda, people discredit them immediately. But you need to read between the lines, because in this case, I think CCP is so brash that it doesn't always hide its feelings, right? So when it's using the analogy, beating the drums while walking at night, it's saying that, oh, the Biden administration is actually so fearful if we do this. Look at what it's doing. So I do think that Xi Jinping thinks Joe Biden is weak, and you could tell that from this article. So by forming a tag team with Putin, he wants to put more pressure on Joe Biden. And I think that's another reason why he went to Russia. Now, lastly, by referring to the sorts of problems that American society is experiencing, I think the CCP is referring to the political division within the American society. And by emphasizing that, by embellishing on that, CCP wants to create a false illusion of the East is rising and the West is falling. I know many Americans probably don't care what the CCP say or says about or thinks about America. But we must know there are international audiences who may believe CCP's narratives. Why does the CCP keep repeating the decline of America? They're not necessarily saying that to Americans, but they're saying that to the international community. The vast majority of the audiences outside of the US or the international audiences are watching the drama unfolding between China and the US. And we'll be picking a side that's winning or seems to be winning. And don't assume that America always appears to be winning, because we're used to our way of looking at our problems, but there are other people from other countries may see it differently. So this tactic is designed for audiences outside of the US. I just think Americans should defend its reputation and not just ignore them. The CCP has a saying, when lies are told 1,000 times, they become truth. I think when a lie is told 1,000 times, it should be exposed 1,000 times. They should not become truth. Now, as far as whether East is rising and West is falling, that, we know that's false. A friend said this very well, and he said, well, the East is definitely not rising, and the West seems to be falling. And he said, well, the East is actually also falling. So the West and East are both falling. It's just that the East is falling much faster than the West. And I think to some extent that's true. We're not talking about one is rising, the other is falling. I think the two are both falling down. It's just which one is falling faster. And that makes a whole lot of difference. Now, as far as whether China will provide weapons to Russia, I think another article from People's Daily also provided some hints. It's also on March the 18th, and this one is headlined. It's about Xi's visit to Russia, and it's a trip of friendship, a trip of collaboration, and a trip of peace. What struck me was the article addressed the claim that China is providing military aid to Russia and helping Russia systematically avoid sanctions. And this is what it says. It says, in terms of military exports, China has always taken a prudent and responsible approach and controlled the export of dual use. Dual use here meaning military and civilian hybrid use, right? And controlled the export of dual use items in accordance with the law and regulations. So you see, CCP did not deny providing assistance to Russia. If you went with, like it could totally be saying, we didn't do it. It's false accusation and you're lying. I mean, CCP can say, those things, but it did not. It did not. It just says, it did not deny anything. It just only vaguely stated that it controls the export of military products. Nor did the CCP promise not to supply Russia with weapons in the future, but instead it says the cooperation between the two countries has plenty of potential and space. I think the CCP has done a lot of bad things behind the scene, and the international community, for the most part, has ignored or tolerated its bad behaviors, such as the investigation into the origin of the pandemic, which we're hearing now. And you think, why is the United States suddenly interested in the investigation of the origin of COVID-19 3 years after outbreak? Isn't it a little too late? Why is American media now reporting the Chinese providing supplies to the Russian military after 1 year into the war? That just shows you that we have been trying to win China over diplomatically by trying to save China's face, and we try to work with them for as long as we can, but it did not work. But my point is, diplomacy only works when you are dealing with a civilized person. Diplomacy, or Western diplomacy, only works when you're dealing with parties that are civilized. When you're dealing with a regime that's whose principle is not based on civilized manners of doing business, your diplomacy does not work, or your sense of diplomacy does not work. You need to come up with a different strategy or different tactics to deal with the CCP. And the CCP knows that. CCP knows how Western diplomacy work. They know how the games you play. So it's taken advantage of that just by playing rogue, right? By playing very low. So that's my analysis on the technical reasons. Now let's talk about the strategic reasons. The CCP has two 100-year plan that was proposed by the former CCP leader Jiang Zemin in 1997 at the 15th Party Congress. And the first centennial plan is the centennial anniversary of CCP in the year 2021, and the second is the PRC's centennial anniversary or centennial goal in 2014, and both aims to grow China into the most powerful nation in the world, or actually the goal for the second centennial goal by 2049, the goal is to grow China into the most powerful nation in the world, overtaking the United States. And after him, Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping further embellished the plan after Jiang. But it really was Xi Jinping, was not until Xi Jinping who actually really made this plan one of his top priority. The reason people don't know about this plan was Deng Xiaoping had told the CCP leaders that they should hide our strength and bide our time, right? You've heard of that expression, to say, let's just keep quiet, keep growing our national strength, keep making money, don't say anything, don't be noticeable. But that has been CCP's long-term strategic plan to overtake the United States. But they know that in order to achieve this goal, they must have a helper. And that helper is no other than Russia. Although Russia's economy is only now a fraction of China's, it has what China doesn't have: energy, agriculture, and a robust arms industry. China also has what Russia doesn't have or needs: manufacturing capability and technological accomplishments in the area of artificial intelligence, internet, space, and the robotics. However, the Russians weren't so easy to deal with because they didn't trust, or they don't trust, the CCP. But the war brought them together. Xi Jinping seriously thought that Putin would have a swift victory in Ukraine, but that didn't happen. From March 2022 to before the party congress in the fall last year, Xi Jinping was mostly focused on his third term. So he didn't have drastic moves in international affairs and was trying to avoid attention from the United States. I mean, occasionally, if you remember last year, I mean, he would send like mixed signals. Sometimes he would, remember he demoted the deputy minister of foreign ministry, the guy who claimed that sky is the limit with our collaboration with Russia. Le Yuchen, right? That's his name. He was going to be promoted to be the minister of foreign affairs, but because of he became a scapegoat after the war, after Putin didn't win the war swiftly, and Xi Jinping had to do something to show the outside world that he is not on the Russian side. So he demoted that deputy minister, yeah. And so and then he sent a special envoy to Europe to trying to appease the Europeans and trying to say, oh, we're not bad, we want to improve relations with you. I mean, there were a number of moves that Xi Jinping did last year trying to repair relations, or at least prevent relations from further deterioration. But all of that was done to assure that he gained a third term. And after the fall, until from October, November till the two sessions, till the beginning of this year, you could see his change in the policy. And I think the balloon incident also changed a lot of things. So his 20th National Congress report, although he didn't mention the United States, but words such as hegemony, Cold War mentality, interference in the internal affairs by foreign countries, they were all referencing the United States. He also issued a stern warning in his report, in the Party Congress report. He said, be prepared to endure major tests of high winds and turbulent waves. You never see this kind of wording, right, in the previous Party Congress report. So it's obvious that after the Party Congress, or at the Party Congress, he made up his mind to confront the United States. For example, another example is February 22nd, China urged state-owned businesses to drop the Big Four auditors. And 2 days ago, Deloitte was fined $46 million by China for accounting irregularity. While the firm that the Deloitte served, its client, Huarong Asset Management, and its 7 subsidiaries, were only fined $15,000 each. I mean, that's just $47 million against the accounting firm versus $15,000 against a company that had accounting irregularities. I mean, that just shows you that Xi Jinping has accelerated rolling out his agenda. And I don't think he cares about what people say about him at this point, because he has completed his succession to 3rd term and he's put his people in positions. And then I think from this point on, he's going to accelerate his agenda. So that's really from a strategic point of view. My point is, for the mid to long term, the CCP knows that it will be embroiled in a battle with the United States politically or ideologically, and Russia is their neighbor, and it's in its backyard. So it is inevitable Xi Jinping's first choice as his helper. So he does not want his helper, number one helper, to fall apart. So that's more from a strategic long-term point of view. Now, let me talk about the personal reason. Xi Jinping belongs to the generation that was born before the Cultural Revolution, and they have a very strong connection to Russia. They grew up with Russian literature, Russian movies and music, while they had no access to American music, American culture. Xi Jinping's father, Xi Zhongxun, was the vice premier overseeing the, overseeing the Russian, what do you call that? The Russian experts helping China build its industries in the 1950s. He was the vice premier in charge of them, in charge of that function. And he visited Moscow in 1959. And returned with Russian-made toys for his children. And Xi Jinping was only 6 years old then. Like many people in his generation, he has a fondness of Russia from very early on. He has a bond with Vladimir Putin that doesn't exist in his relations with other heads of states. 8 days after becoming the president of China, Xi Jinping chose Moscow as his first foreign visit. That not only shows the importance of Russia to his rule, but also shows, I don't know, maybe a personal connection with Putin. And he said that he has met Putin 40 times in the past 10 years, not including the virtual meetings between the two. And he publicly called Putin his best friend and said that they have similar characters. On the other hand, this is what I want to say, Xi Jinping didn't have a good start interacting with American leaders. The first American leader or the American president he met was President Obama in 2012 when he visited the White House as the vice president of China and heir to Hu Jintao. However, I read in a Chinese media article, more than one, that Xi Jinping didn't have a good impression of President Obama when they met, and he found Obama to be arrogant. Now, it's difficult to prove that because, I mean, these are the things that you can't prove. But what I've found is there's another article written by a Chinese. It's like posted on Sohu and made one of the major Chinese news portal, calling the former First Lady Michelle Obama also arrogant. And I thought that's interesting. And it was during the summit between Obama and Xi Jinping in June 2013 at the former Annenberg estate in California. And June 2013 will be a few months after he became the president of China, right? So he became president probably in March after the 2 sessions of that year, similar to the one that we had a few weeks ago. And so after that, the first trip he made was to Russia, and that was in March. And then 3 months later, he visited the United States, and he had a summit with Obama in California. Now, Xi Jinping's wife, Peng Liyuan, came with him to California. But Michelle Obama didn't go to California because, well, I'm just quoting you what the Chinese say. The Chinese said the reason they gave was she needed to take care of her 2 daughters. And the Chinese were upset. And they didn't believe that the First Lady of the United States couldn't find a nanny to attend, to babysit, and then go attend an important function with another head of state and his wife. So they called her arrogant. Okay. And that wasn't everything. There's a third incident. And I don't know if it's because of the lack of good chemistry between the 2 heads of state, but a third incident, it transpired into a third incident in 2016 when Obama went to China to attend the G20 summit. Media reported that Beijing here it is. I do have a page. Here it is. You probably heard of it already. So the world's media reported Beijing's calculated diplomatic snub to Obama when he arrived in China, right? So Beijing rolled out red carpets for world's leaders attending the summit, but forced Obama to disembark from Air Force One through a little-used exit in the plane's belly after no rolling staircase was provided during a chaotic arrival in Hangzhou. Now that's interesting, and I read the report. It went the protocols have it that the United States president arrived in Air Force One and used American rolling staircase to descend from the airplane, and the Chinese agreed to that. But last minute, the Chinese said, no, we can't provide that, or we can't use that. You have to come down on a Chinese staircase. And then, so that force, of course, Obama didn't want to do that. So instead he chose to come through this other rear exit without the red carpet on a lower staircase. So that was the incident. Now, I don't think Xi Jinping told his people to snub Obama like that. But in China, there are a lot of eager middle-level officials who want to do things to please their big boss. So who knows? That maybe someone organized this to make Xi Jinping happy. So with these, I only looked briefly and I found these 3 incidents related to the personal relations between Xi Jinping and Obama, and unfortunately, the relations between 2 nations is no more than the relations that their leaders maintain, right? So for the past 70 years, the dynamic relations between China, Russia, and the United States have shifted the world. And in the decades following World War II, the 2 largest communist states formed an alliance against the United States, even though China and Russia had border disputes and other conflicts. In the second half of the Cold War, the United States started to side with China to contain the USSR, and leading to its eventual collapse in 1991. Now, after 70 years, we were back to where we started. China and Russia have joined hands again to face their common adversary, the United States. But what's different today than 70 years ago is that Russia is no longer the big brother. China now has the upper hand in the relations. And China is now the largest communist state in the world. So with that, I wrap up my talk. I hope this is helpful. All right. Okay. Let me see if people have questions for me. All right. Oh, there are a lot of comments. Good. People are having a lively discussion from Amy Lai. Thank you, Amy. Thank you. All right. Let me see a question. Would China invade Russia just to land grab because Russia could become severely crippled and people could revolt on Putin? It depends on CCP's motivation for war. I made a video about CCP's motivation for war, and I released part 1 last Thursday. I'm making part 2. It's about the Vietnam War. Hopefully, and there's part 3. And hopefully by the end of that, you'll see you would think a country would start a war with its neighbor because it wants to take it wants to take the disputed land back, or they have a land dispute they want to take. Well, I think this is mine, I want to take it back. No, CCP's motivation for war is twisted. It's different. You will see in the 3 major wars that CCP got involved in the past 70 years, yes, it's all for some ulterior motives than what you can see on the surface. So I can't really answer that question until the situation arises, and we'll see, what it entails. From Luke. Lei, do you think if China's economy deteriorated less quickly that they wouldn't be as driven? Oops, where did it go? To couple themselves to Russia? If so, could the US slow down decoupling? Do you think if China's economy deteriorated less quickly, that they wouldn't be as driven to, China's economy is already in a very bad shape. And that didn't stop Xi Jinping from supporting Russia. That didn't stop Xi Jinping. Any leader with a normal sense of judgment would focus on domestic economy and their people's well-being before being entangled in an affair that's only causing controversy. But that's not the mindset of a CCP leader. They don't look at it that way. So China's economy is already pretty bad, but does that matter to him? I don't think so. So hopefully I answered your question. Let's see. From Travel with Love, thank you very much for sharing your insights. Thank you. Thank you, Travel with Love. Happy Tuesday. 周二快乐. That's cute. From Looney Tune 78. Lei, can you give your input to Mao's quote, only peace will come at the barrel of a gun? I think the original quote is not only peace will come at the barrel of gun. I think political power will come at the barrel of a gun. 枪杆子里面出政权, right? So it means political power or regime will arise from the barrel of gun. From Sumiland, does she see a possible collapse of Putin's regime? Of course, I think he's very concerned. Otherwise, he wouldn't go out of his way to help his buddy. I think he's very concerned with the way things are going. He feels like he needs to do something. Yes. From Miguel. Lei, what are your thoughts about Putin and Xi having a similar difficult background growing up? I have not done a lot of research on Putin's background as a child. I think there is, heads of state, right? We as human beings, we tend to work better with people that we can connect. I think that there is a bond between Xi Jinping and Putin. Now, whether or not that's related to their upbringing, their childhood, I do not know, because I don't know enough about Putin's childhood to say that. But I think the bond between the two of them is definitely there. So, but unfortunately, it has become a dangerous bond. So I just think the United States or the Western alliance should have recognized that they should prevent the two from forming this bond, because it's more dangerous for the world, and it's taking more resources from the EU and the United States to deal with this bond. And then and look at our economy. I mean, their money could be spent elsewhere. And so I think the fact that we failed to prevent the two from bonding with each other is a lesson that we should evaluate. I think we should, yeah. I think, for example, the tactic of just saying, "Oh, I know you're going to do this," right? Just like the example I gave earlier, like, you're telling a kid who's not irrational, who wants to do something destructive, and you tell the kid, "I know you're going to do this," or telling everyone, telling the whole world, the kid is going to do this. What do you think? The next thing, the kid is going to do that, because he's already irrational. He's already seeing you as his enemy. So that's already too late. So it takes wisdom for world leaders to prevent war from happening, and that's the best. The Chinese medicine and Western medicine are very different. And I talked to a Chinese doctor, and he gave me this analogy. He said, Chinese medicine deals with healthcare. It's real healthcare, because we try to prevent illnesses from happening. And he said, it's just like we live in a society where there are terrorists, there are bad elements whose goal, or who are here trying to cause troubles. You have two approaches. The Western medicine's approach is to identify them and eliminate them. But the more you do that, the more you cause them to react, right? And then you tie yourself up. But the Chinese medicine approach is trying to build a benign environment. We could coexist with terrorists as long as the terrorists do not do bad things. You try to do something to make sure that like we all have cancerous cells in our body, but why do some people have developed cancer and some others don't? It's because their body, is benign enough. The cancerous cells cannot do anything. So the whole idea of the traditional Chinese medicine is, how do you make your body is filled with positive energy, or has a benign condition, so it kind of suppresses the bad elements from acting up. And that's the Eastern wisdom. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration by the heads of state right now. You can't just eliminate them and then eventually. So I'm just using the analogy from Eastern and Western medicine. I don't know if it's a good analogy, but hopefully I have illustrated a point. All right, I've talked a lot. So there's a lot of questions, so I'm sorry. Lei, why do you think the Vietnam Communist Party has the opposite perspective to Obama, where he's admired, then the CCP continues the Cold War mentality? I didn't say that. I didn't say the Vietnamese Communist Party has the opposite perspective to Obama. It could be a misunderstanding. Sorry. From W. Wang Zilei, what are the chances now that CCP will invade Taiwan in the next couple of years? Is Ukraine war still providing distraction for NATO? From what we have seen, I think Xi Jinping recognized that an imminent military operation is not good for his regime, because he's likely to fail. So they are focusing on propaganda, a soft takeover, right? The fact that he put Wang Huning in charge of the CCPPC, the Chinese Political Consultative Conference, which is in charge of infiltration and influence campaign, I think tells me he's more focused on influence campaign, a soft takeover from within, and the next priority is the 2014 presidential election in Taiwan. Before considering other military options. All right, let's see. All right. From law of improbability. Okay, I love that. Lei, how does the CCP internal propaganda present Gorbachev's? Oops, it disappeared. Where did it go? It went up. Oh, here it is. Observation: the Soviet economy was failing. When the former USSR collapsed in 1992, the CCP leaders were very alarmed. I think Deng Xiaoping was sleepless because he was very concerned. And then Xi Jinping's famous quote regarding the collapse of the Russian Communist Party or the Soviet Communist Party, was he said, was there, he challenged, was there not a real man who step out to prevent the party from falling apart? So I think, he was surprised that not one person stepped out just trying to save the party. So I think he has put himself in the position of trying to save the CCP from falling. That's what I heard. What are your thoughts from Linda Kasapovrova? Sorry if I mispronounced your name. What are your thoughts on China in the Middle East? I think it's trying to establish itself as a major player in international affairs. It's going to focus on the Middle East just because the United States has not been focusing on that region as much now. Yeah, so the CCP is going to do whatever the U.S. cannot get its hands on. So it's basically just focusing, watching and analyzing the weakest link in the U.S. Foreign policy or foreign relations, and then turn that in its favor. All right, so let's see. From Sila Larson, I don't think the CCP is especially Chinese in a traditional sense, though. Certainly not the way the PRC seeks to expand in the world. Very cancerous when it's unnecessary. Yeah, the CCP is not Chinese because the whole communist ideology, Karl Marx is from what, Germany? So the whole ideology is foreign. It's not Chinese. And it directly, it's in conflict with traditional Chinese beliefs held by Confucius, right, and Lao Tzu. So why Cultural Revolution happened in China in the 1960s? It's because Mao realized that if he didn't get rid of traditional Chinese culture and values, it's very difficult for Chinese people to accept communism because they're fundamentally at odds with each other. Because the Chinese believe in the harmony of harmony with others, harmonious relations. So it's not going to like the idea of class struggles, revolution, constant fighting. So how are you going to turn traditional Chinese to fight each other? So it's very difficult for Mao to roll out the concept of communism, and that's why Cultural Revolution happened. Because by claiming that Confucius is bad, by getting rid of traditional values and culture, then the Chinese people lost their cultural heritage. They've been brainwashed then they would inadvertently accept communism. So you're right, CCP is not Chinese at all. Marcus Wilson, hi, do you think CCP will fail Chinese economy the same way Japan did? No, because they're completely different. Japan is a democratic country. It's a market economy, and China is not. China can withstand the pressure of a collapsing economy because it has power over its people, right? It can. Just to give you an example, I just saw on the social media yesterday a woman who had terminally ill, who was sick, who was dying from her terminally ill disease, wrote a will, and she has about like over 10 million yuan in her bank, and she has no family, no children. So she wrote a will to give the money to her best friend. And after the woman died, the friend went to the bank and want to, transfer the money to her name. And then bank said, no, you cannot have that money. The money is ours. Basically said, you are not her family. We're not giving you her money. I mean, there's no rule of law. I mean, the bank can do that. I mean, so that's just one example. And so the government, when by any standard, the Chinese economy would have already collapsed, right? If it's indeed a market economy, but the regime is preventing it from happening by all sorts of means, by basically embezzling money from its citizens. And so it will not fail in the same way as Japan, because they have totally different systems. All right, so I think I've answered all the questions. Wow. Well, thank you very much. It's almost 1 hour, and I will come back later this week. Enjoy the rest of the day or the rest of the evening. Okay. All right. I'll provide a few references after this. So if you're interested in reading the articles, you have the link. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.